Here we go.
Thanks. Thank you, Terry. I want to thank you for inviting me and presenting tonight. I appreciate this opportunity. I am going to present kind of a little different presentation, I guess, than what I normally do here. Uh, but I think I hopefully it'll work out. It's content heavy and not as much as instruction is what I do on a lot of mine, but there is always some instruction because um, it's not a presentation without some instruction. So, my name's John Gregor. If you are not familiar with me, I run Cold Snap Photography, and I am based sometimes in Two Harbors, Minnesota. Tonight, I'm going to present the stories we tell, telling stories with landscape and travel photography. I'm going to go over a little bit about what I do and how I do it. And the first thing is the equipment that I use is I'm shooting primarily Fujifilm cameras. I have the X-T3 and X-T2 bodies. You will see a lot of images that have been filtered. I use the Benro filter system with neutral density and graduated neutral density filters. A lot of the images that you're going to see, I'm presenting a host of work that you'll see in a little bit, but a lot of the images that you're going to see were shot with these cameras as well, which are my more pocket cameras. They're the Fujifilm X100F and the discontinued, both of these are discontinued. They have a new one for the X100, it's the X100V. And then they have sort of a replacement for the X70, but that's a discontinued model. But they are excellent cameras, and a lot of the images that you're going to see tonight were made with these cameras, and I love them, and I'll talk a little bit more about how I use them and why. And then you'll see an occasional shot or two with this beast. This is the Cambo Actus bellows, which is it's like a view camera, and in fact, it's got a view camera lens on it for what you see right now. And I drag this out every once in a while when I want to spend a lot of time and play around with the camera before I take a picture. Which, coming from a view camera background, a 4x5 background, that is something I enjoy doing. Just kind of playing around with the camera before I take pictures. So I enjoy using this camera every so often. I have a Sony back on it that I use. I'm going to present work from Mexico, the American Southwest, and North Dakota. And then the dialogue that I'm going to engage in is are these things. They're telling a story with a single image, and I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about telling a story with multiple images and then using words with images. Now, a lot of this sounds like what I'm talking about is photojournalism. I am not a photojournalist. I am a photographer, and I consider myself an art photographer and maybe a photo documentarian, but I'm not a photojournalist. So the techniques that I use are not photojournalists. I'm not beholden to that sort of genre or format. And so it allows me a little bit more freedom, I think. But there's certainly overlap and crossover. Um, and then Terry, with regard to questions, is there a question format that people can ask during the presentation, or will those be handled at the end?
At the bottom.
Okay.
And
So if people have questions, I would
I'll
encourage
try
that.
to
And what
I'll
I
try
will
to I'll try to monitor that.
Okay, that'd be great. And if you could, I'll pause and ask for questions throughout the presentation, and then you can pitch me the questions, and I will answer them
Okay.
to the best of my ability. I'm starting out right away with something that I'm not going to talk about for the rest of the presentation, except for to just put this up and let you know I'm not including work from the North Shore because a week from yesterday or today, actually, on the 10th, I am presenting this work, Cold Snap Studio, at a webinar, and I invite you to join me for that one. You can send me a request, and I can get you the information if you're not friends with me on Facebook, but it's listed on my homepage on Facebook. It is also one of the stories I'm telling. I've been thinking a lot about telling stories with photographs and words, because this last summer I published a book, and I'm going to show you images from that and talk about that. This is my second book in a series of 3 that I'm working on. So the second book is just about done. I'm very close. For those of you that are familiar with the last book, which is the Travels in Mexico, you will be after tonight. This book is about twice as large as that book. So it's a step up. I learned a lot in the process of creating the first book, which is the Travels in Mexico book. And I am using that knowledge for when I'm doing this second book on Cold Snap Studio. The third book in this sort of series that I have in my mind, it's just a series, and it's not a series in relation to each other, but just the 3 books that I came up with that I wanted to do is on the Southwest, and you'll see some images, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. So the first one that I'm going to share with you is this Travels in Mexico, and that book was the result of I've been traveling to Mexico several years now in a row. We're getting ready to go down again this next winter. So that'll be my 4th year in a row that I've been doing extensive visits to Mexico. Last year, a year ago, in the wintertime, we took this trip. We started in Tijuana in the upper left corner there, and drove my Suburban about 6,000 miles over the course of 2 months in Mexico. And we went down, you can see the towns that we stopped at that are listed there. We went down through Llamas, El Fuerte, where you see El Fuerte, where it jogs off to the right to Creel. That is actually, we parked the car in El Fuerte for a week, climbed on the only train, the only passenger train that still runs in Mexico. It goes to a place called Copper Canyon, and ran down to Creel and back on the train, then picked the car up again, went down to Mazatlan, hung a left there through Durango, Zacatecas, San Miguel de Allende, Guanajuato, Querétaro, down to Mexico City, through Zacatlan, Puebla, Zitácuaro, and then back up through Guadalajara and Mazatlan and back. So that was the major trip. I did this trip with my good friend Tommy O'Brien, who I've been traveling with quite a bit, and that's a picture of the 2 of us. You'll see that I have my full-size 35 there. That was one of the rare occasions, actually, I was doing street photography with the with my full-size 35. I'm going to read you the introduction to this book here. I'm going to read a couple of essays that I've done in conjunction with this book that I wrote during the trip, and then are published in this book. So Travels in Mexico is a collection of my writings and photographs from my most recent trips to Mexico. I first crossed the border on a day trip to Tijuana 42 years ago. It wasn't until 3 years ago when my good friend and travel companion, Tommy O'Brien, urged me to join him in exploring Mexico that I fell in love with the country. Our first trip to the interior was to Mexico City, then Puebla City, and finally to the little mountain village of Zitácuaro and the Monarch biospheres, which are home to millions of migrating monarch butterflies. The following spring, I returned to Puebla City for a 6-week course in Spanish. Tommy joined me for the final 2 weeks of this trip, and it was then that we conceived of a plan to spend 2 months driving to the historic small towns in the central highlands of Mexico. We reasoned that driving my Chevy Suburban would give us the most freedom for photographing and exploring the heartland of Mexico. The central highlands of the heartland of Mexico are where Cortez and the Spanish conquistadors built a new world. During the early to mid 1500s, in a flurry of expansion and building, the Spanish created a network of towns in their distinctive European-styled architecture and design. Today, these towns are called Pueblo Magicos, or magic cities. When you enter one of these towns, it is as if you've stepped back into another time. Our choice of travel destinations played well with another one of our objectives, our desire to avoid tourist destinations. We especially wanted to avoid the all-inclusive resorts that cater to the Playa de Gringo version of Mexico with plastic palm trees and umbrella drinks. These short stories were first written and posted on my Facebook page as a running blog about our travels. They are presented here to enhance the photographs and complete the story. This is not a travel guide to Mexico, although it is my hope that after you have viewed and heard these stories, you are inspired to travel to Mexico. It is a truly amazing country, rich with history, beautiful in landscape, and unique in culture. Now, naturally, one of the things that we were assessing was the issue of safety. And when you start doing travel photography, I think that is a pertinent sort of topic, no matter where you go, no matter what country you're going to. And certainly with Mexico, we had our apprehensions. I mean, after all, a lot of the stories that we had heard were less favorable. And your idea about a place is shaped by what you hear time and time again. So we started digging into it. I have another little essay here I'm going to read because it explains our thought process that we went through to prepare ourselves before we went down into Mexico. So safety. Tommy and I started to plan this trip in July of 2019. Our biggest question we had was safety. Would we be safe and what were the risks? To try to answer these questions, we consulted several sources. The U.S. State Department was one of those sources. They tracked crime against U.S. citizens while traveling in foreign countries and then ascribed a rated system of warnings for specific areas within foreign countries. The rating system is a level 1 through level 4 system. Level 1, exercise normal caution. Level 2, exercise increased caution. Level 3, reconsider travel. And level 4, do not travel. Most of the states we traveled through in Mexico had travel advisories of 3 or 4. Another source we consulted was Facebook. Facebook has perhaps the largest collection of anecdotal evidence regarding individual experience while traveling in Mexico. The 2 pages with the largest Facebook membership were On the Road in Mexico and Survival Guide to Mexico. They are about as opposite as you can get in tone and content of experience. Survival Guide has a bright red banner on its opening page with many of its posts written in all caps, sort of the equivalent of virtual screaming, warning you of all the danger and crime. In evaluating these sites and the content, it quickly became apparent that there were many more contributing members to the On the Road site than the Survival Guide. In addition, the quality of information about particular locations or experiences was much better in On the Road. Many of the posts in Survival Guide were vague about specific details, places, or dates. I also researched a few other sources. One of those sources was the Federal State Department overall crime statistics in Mexico, which I then compared with overall crime statistics in the United States, which I located from a variety of other governmental and non-governmental sources. Ironically, the State Department does not keep track of crime against visitors who come to the U.S. from other countries. In 2018, there were 35 million U.S. citizens who visited Mexico. There were 75 murders of U.S. citizens in Mexico that same year. Those are pretty good odds, I'd say. Mexico can be a dangerous place, yet so can the United States. You are, in fact, 3 to 5 times more likely to be a victim of crime in the U.S. than in Mexico. If you account for all major violent crimes, assault, aggravated assault, armed robbery, rape, murder, murder with a firearm, There is only one category which Mexico surpasses the United States, and that is murder without a firearm. In all other areas of crime, the U.S. is a far more dangerous place to be. One can't help but wonder what the U.S. State Department travel advisory levels would be if they applied the same criteria they use in Mexico to states within the United States. We evaluated all the evidence, assessed the risks. The result was that we agreed to a few rules for ourselves. 1, never travel at night. 2, stay on the highways unless we know the back roads are considered reasonably safe. 3, don't use or buy illegal drugs. Not a difficult rule for either of us, as we are not prone to such things. 4, no public intoxication. And finally, 5, if we are going out in a city at night, use Uber or walk only on main thoroughfares with lots of traffic. In short, use common sense and trust your intuition. And that served us very well. What we found was a country that was full of wonderful people willing to take the time to share with us their culture, their place, and wanted to get to know us. And we had a wonderful time. So I think that's true just about anywhere that you go. If you use common sense and don't go where you're not supposed to and don't look for trouble, you're probably going to come away with a pretty good experience. So I've been showing you a number of images from our travels throughout these little towns and locations that we went to, a lot of cultural sites. That North Central Highlands area was rich in gold and silver for the Spanish conquistadors, where they built these towns because they wanted to go in and mine the riches and extract the minerals, and they built these incredibly beautiful towns there. The ruins, which are all over the country, and much like in this country as well as many other places, you have culture and history that layer on top of each other. And this particular site, which was not far from Zitzcaro, was a hillside, a mountainside that was full of pyramids, and they had chopped the jungle back from basically a very small area to expose several of these pyramids. But there were literally dozens of pyramids that engulfed this mountainside that was huge. And that's a lot of the case down there, where you go to these pyramids and these architectural sites, and what you're seeing is only a small portion of what is there overall at the location, because the jungle has taken over areas. In fact, the town I spent the most amount of time in, and one of my favorite towns in Mexico, which is Puebla, there is a sort of a suburb of it right next door, which has this huge, it had this huge hill or mesa that rose up, and the Spaniards came along and said, "Oh, that's a great place. We're going to build a church," and they built this church in about 1540 on the top of this hill. And then in the 1930s, some archaeologists were looking at that thing and going, this doesn't look like a natural hill, and started to excavate it, and it turned out that it was the largest man-made pyramid in the world. And it was actually built over the course of thousands of years, and there were several iterations of it, where many thousands of years ago, one tribe came in, built part of it, and then they died out or left, and a new culture came in and built on top of that, and another one came in and built on top of that, until they had this thing that was basically looked like a huge hill, and then the Spaniards came and put a church on the top. So I find the Mexican people very, very friendly and very open. They, by and large, didn't mind having their photograph taken. Many times they encouraged that. Certainly, there were times when we were at places where some people didn't want to, and we, I honored that. I'm not going to force myself to photograph anybody. Um, I want to read another story, another short little story here that I have that I think is particularly germane. Um, we sort of we get our views and notion about the world through our press and our. I think that the press it by and large does a pretty good job. There's all kinds of political stuff that goes on as far as what we hear and what we see. I know that. I think as savvy um, consumers of media, we need to constantly be asking ourselves about the backstory to what we're reading or what we're hearing from these sources, because I think that there are things that shape those things. I think that there are a lot of very good people that want to tell something that is close to the truth, but I think that there's also the shaping of that's both organic as well as intentional. But this story sort of addresses that. It's called One Story. If you only tell one story about a place, sooner or later that story defines that place. It might not be an accurate story, but it is the one people will remember. I am sitting to write this on a park bench in a beautiful little Mexican village called Zitacaro, where I just spent several hours strolling the streets and taking in the sights. It is a wonderful Friday night with children playing in the town square, families meeting to gossip, musicians playing to an ever-changing audience of strollers, vendors filling the night air with sumptuous aromas of countless delicacies, and young lovers stealing kisses in the shadows. These weekend street dramas are a major reason why I fell in love with the Latin culture. Zitacaro is situated in the mountains in the middle of the state of Michoacan. If you search the U.S. State Department website, you will see that this state has a level 4 travel advisory. This is the highest travel advisory that can be applied. It means that the U.S. State Department advises no unnecessary travel. This travel advisory is further emphasized by the media reports of two butterfly conservationists, that's in quotation marks, who have been murdered here recently. Gomez Gonzalez and Hernandez Romero were murdered in January. News reports link them to one of the butterfly sanctuaries in Michoacan. I just spent 2 days at one of these sanctuaries, and I talked to the couple of the locals who knew these men. Hernandez Romero was a logger and a lumberyard owner. He held a number of positions, including director of the local water rights board. Those who knew him said he was known for making dubious deals with respect to this position on the water rights board. He had crossed many people by pushing water rights to certain industrial interests. He was, in short, the furthest thing from a conservationist you can imagine. His body was found in a well. Pretty strong statement, I would say. Gomez Gonzalez worked at a butterfly sanctuary. He parked cars. It is unknown why he was murdered, but his job at the Monarch Sanctuary was rather inconsequential, so it is unlikely that it had anything to do with the politics of conservation. I know that these accounts don't jive with what you may have heard or read in the U.S. media, but these are the words from the locals here. So most of these street photographs are being done with these small pocket cameras that I carry around. I love them because they're less obtrusive and sort of in your face than a larger size camera. In fact, the smaller one, the X70, is one of my favorites. It has both of these cameras have fixed lenses. They're not a zoom lens or a fixed lens on the Fuji, but it's an APS size sensor, so it's got a good size sensor. The image quality is excellent, and the the sensor is quite large, and so um, you can use high ISOs and handhold. What's really nice about this camera, it's got a 28 millimeter lens equivalent. You can slip it in your pocket, either a breast pocket or a pant pocket real easily, which means that it disappears. And so you can interact with people without this big camera there, pull it out when you want to use it, and take photographs and then slip it away. So I love that about it, because it sort of changes the dynamic. If you have a great big full size 35, that's a sort of intimidating thing to point at somebody. When you have a little pocket camera like this, it's like a point and shoot. It's like, you're not, oh, he's a professional. No, you're just a guy taking a snapshot, and it's a much more relaxed atmosphere. So, oh boy. What have I got here? Why can't I advance? Let's see. So Arlene started annotating, and when that happened, now I can't advance. Help. There we go. Stop annotating. That's what happened. All right. She's great. This is Maria from Day of the Dead costume. And this is a guy with a traditional garb on, headdress from the Aztec times. So a lot of street actors would get dressed up in costumes and be out on the Zocolos and the town squares on a Friday or Saturday night, and they would, they did whatever they were doing for tips. And, so that's sort of how they augmented their income. So yeah, usually if I, like with these portraits, I would give them some pesos, because that's how they make their money. So I would reward that. I found this guy and his wife, we were at a little small village up in the mountains, and they were having a festival and a community dance at night in the community center where we were at, and he was just dressed to the nines, man. So I had to ask him if I could photograph him, which he readily agreed to, and his wife stepped in, and so I did a portrait of the two of them. This is Mazatlan and uh, the carnival. We ended up there, so we were at the carnival in February. We had a wonderful time. Of course, this is pre-COVID. We came back to the U.S. We got to the U.S. just when everything kind of went nuts. So it was pre-COVID. COVID was not anywhere discovered in Mexico at the time we were there. So the last section on Mexico that I'm going to share with you are some photographs from the town near Zitácuaro, which is where the biospheres are, the preserves for the monarch butterflies. If you're not familiar with this phenomenon, monarch butterflies migrate. They migrate from North America, Canada, and the U.S. down they migrate to about 3 or 4 different locations. The largest by far is the location in Mexico, which is up in the mountains. It's way up in the mountains. And the first time that I was there, we took a very non-standard route there. We knew that there were monarch butterflies at the top of this mountain, and there are several sites. There are two of the main sites where you would go in by bus, and they run busloads of people through, and you get off the bus and they run you through and you see monarchs, and then they take you out and away on a bus. So they have a lot of people visiting them. The third one is a little more remote. It requires about a 2-hour horseback ride to go up to the top of the mountain where the butterflies are. And if you go up one side of the mountain, that's where all the tourists are, or the tour guides are. And it's small. You're in a small group. You go up with maybe a couple dozen people at the most on horseback, and then you're up there for a while, and then you come back down. The route we took was very non-tourist related. We drove up the other side of the mountain, and we basically drove as far as we could, and then went up to see the butterflies. So I'm going to read the story that I wrote about that experience when we first went. This is Reserva del Biosfera Santiago Mariposa. I know there is no way to convey the depth of this experience, not by still photography, not by video, not even by the written word. Imagine yourself traveling deep into the heart of the Mexican countryside, driving up a mountain that is really no more than a goat path. At the end of the road, when you can't possibly drive any further, you arrive at a pasture where a couple of compadres are plowing the field with a pair of horses. After a short negotiation, they agree to unhitch the horses, saddle them for you, and take you up rocky, steep paths, 2,000 feet higher in elevation, to the monarch butterflies. 2 hours later, you are at 11,000 feet and are the only gringo or tourist watching hundreds of thousands of monarch butterflies swarming in the trees. One of the local guides gestures and encourages you to cup your hands to your ears and listen. You do as you are told, and you hear the most amazing sound, tens of thousands of butterfly wings beating the air. It was, without a doubt, the most magical experience I've experienced probably in any of my travels. The process of doing that was quite amazing. I'm going to run through a couple other projects that I've got here. Before I do that, I'm going to ask Terry if we have any questions, if there's been any questions anybody's asked so far.
Yeah, there was one that showed up in the chat room. Do you have any opinion on doing photography with an iPhone or any cell phone?
We would joke, kind of tongue in cheek, when we would get to a location, and a lot of times we'd pull out our big cameras and would photograph it, and then we would usually say to one of the other of us would say, well, now I'm going to pull out my real camera, which was a phone, and take photographs. And I had the iPhone 7 at the time, and now I've upgraded to the 11, and wow, man, what a difference, and even better. It's an amazing camera. I think that the best camera, of course, is the camera you have with you. You can take amazing photographs. It's about how you photograph. It also becomes how you want to use it, because there are limitations with the cell phone as far as making prints and the quality of what those prints will be and how large you can make them. There's also certain things that the iPhone or a cell phone can't do, like they aren't able to do long exposures at night and stuff like that. So there are some limitations, but they're a great tool, and by all means, I use that. I use whatever tools I have available, and that is one.
Okay, another question is Mexico has so many colors. So why do you shoot mostly black and white?
Um, yeah, the Mexico work I did. It's probably the majority is black and white. It's probably about a 60-40 split, 60% black and white and 40% color. Um, and there's a lot of reasons why one would want to change to black and white. But one of the reasons I really liked with the black and white conversions was because it strips away um, the distraction of color and gets to the content. So you see the content of the image in a different way, and then you're left with the elements that are there that become more important and stand out in a way that color can't do. So again, it's a tool that I use, and in the case of Mexico, I also like the timeless quality of a lot of the landscapes or the people photographs that look as though that they could have been taken yesterday or they could have been taken 50 years ago. And with color, you don't have that same feeling. It locks you into um, a more straightforward representation, where the black and white I believe, gives you a little more, um, I guess, feeling behind it, and a little more artistic leeway too. So, and I'll.
One other question that I had, John, myself, is it fair for me to assume that you learn the language?
uh, I've tried. I'm really slow with languages. I will be the first one to admit. I took a 6-week course. I went to Mexico and took a 6-week immersion course, and I think I need about 6 months. I know muy poquito español, and Tommy knows much more than I do. He studied about 3 years of Spanish at a local college in Minnesota, and he has a much better grasp of the language than I do. I can sort of kind of follow along, but my skills are limited. I will be the first to admit. All right, I'm going to move on. If we're done with questions, I'm going to move on to the next section, which this is will be the third book that I'm working on, and this is called Walking the Skin of the Earth. It is about the American Southwest, and this is not nearly as developed as either the Cold Snap Studio series of work or the Mexico series of work. I still have a lot more work to do. I have a concept in my mind that I'm working on, but I don't have any solid writing, so I won't be reading any stories. And why can't I advance? There we go. So this area is, I'm based in Bluff. That's where I am calling you from this evening. Bluff is a small town of about 350 people in the southeast corner of Utah. You can see it's right near the Four Corners area. And I'm a stone's throw away from about 3 or 4 Native American reservations, the Navajo Nation being the largest. The Hopi, the Zuni, and the Ute are all down in this area. It's a fascinating area. This town is a wonderful small town full of a lot of artists. It's sort of it's an enclave. Most of Utah is very conservative Mormon, and that is not exactly my style. And I discovered this little town of Bluff, which has very few Mormons living in it and mostly sort of artists. And I fit in quite well here and like this town a lot. And so I've started to document the surrounding area. I'm a certified guide for the Cedar Mesa area down here, which means that I can run tours to the local area. And then there are the reservations that are surrounding all around this. And while I've made some friends in the Native American community, I haven't made a lot, to tell the truth, and that is one of the areas I want to explore more and learn more about their culture. Um, so I have photographed a lot of the ruins and a lot of the rock art that's down here. There are thousands and thousands of sites, um, tens of thousands of sites. There is more than a lifetime worth of work if you want to go in and document these places. And of course, they're set in these stunningly beautiful areas. You will see that this work is primarily black and white. And again, I like that because it kind of strips away some of the seduction of the color and gets, I believe, to the content of the photographs a little bit more. Um, the work I'm doing right now with the book on Cold Snap Studio and the work I've done on the North Shore. That's literally all. I mean, it's almost all color. There's very little black and white in that. Where the Southwest just, I don't know, there's something about it that shows so well in black and white, which I really like a lot. And so that's what I've been working with down here, is primarily black and white on this work. This is a traditional Hogan. This is a male Hogan. There are male Hogans and female Hogans. This one is male, which is conical in shape, and female is more rounded in shape. The woman that was doing the spinning was in a female Hogan. They are Navajo sacred spaces where they gather, and they typically will do weaving and storytelling and things. So I love this tree. This is a tree right outside of town where I live here, and it's called the hanging tree. What's wonderful about the hanging tree is that I photographed it. And every time and you change angle just a little bit on it, and it totally changes the shape. So you can go back to it again and again and again, and it's a wonderful landmark. So this is Canyon de Chelly. I've been broadening out from the Cedar Mesa area and exploring some other areas. I'm getting ready to go on another trip here that's going to be about a week long. I'll be going down to Canyon de Chelly and Chaco Canyon again and photographing down there. The rock art that is here is it tells stories of the mythology of the various tribes. And again, most rock art panels that you'll come across down here in a variety of different locations have multiple markings on them, and most of them have multiple markings on them by multiple cultures over time. So if you look at a rock art panel or a section of rock art that's there, you can't simply look at it and say, oh, this is the story of this people. There are parts of it that you can pull out that will tell that story, but there's layers. So it's like sort of like peeling an onion. And the various tribes and peoples that made the rock art have come in and moved out or gone extinct, and new ones have come in. I'm working with a woman that I met down here who is an archaeologist, who's studied this stuff for 34 years. And it's absolutely fascinating to go out with her every time I go out. And she tells and interprets the stories that are there, which is the stories of the beliefs and the mythologies of the various tribes down here. And it's a fascinating account, and it's always a lot of fun to join her on an outing. That writing will work into this. So I've got to do a lot of writing, and some of it will be hers because she's willing to collaborate with me on this. So we're going to sort of interweave some of these stories about the Native Americans and their mythology in with the landscapes that I'm creating down here. So it might take me a while to do that. I don't think I'll be putting this third book out anytime in the next couple months. It's probably going to be next year, and might well be the end of next year before I get it done. And house runs. I don't know the name of that's probably just a little granary. It's amazing some of these sites, and I mean most of the sites that are here are between about 800 and 12 years old, as far as the cliff dwellers. But there are sites that go back even longer than that, a couple thousand years or more, that are the Puebla 1 and 2, that those are not the cliff dwellings, that they're built on the ground, and they were built, they usually had a stone foundation of some sort, so you could see a raised ring on the ground, but then they were built out of a wood structure, so there's nothing left because they're 2,000 years old and the wood is long since rotted away. And a lot of times later cultures will come in and take those stones and use them for building material for cliff dwellers of the more recent variety. That's Shiprock, which is in New Mexico. And then the final image from this series that I'm showing you tonight is another view of the hanging tree, but in this case with the Milky Way, and some wonderful meteors, which I didn't even see while I was shooting. But when I got back to the computer and started processing the image, I saw that I had captured these wonderful meteors. So that's the hanging tree. And you'll see some lit areas in the background back there. That is the little town of Bluff. This shot was made this last spring during the pandemic. And one of the nice things about the pandemic meant that most of the businesses, there are not a lot, but there's about a half a dozen hotels, because the town of Bluff really caters to tourism. So that's the main industry. There's about a half a dozen hotels and a couple of restaurants in town, and most of those places were shut down, which meant that they didn't have their lights on. So it was great for night skies even right around Bluff because there was less light pollution. You go out ways, and that's one of the really wonderful things about being down here, is it's absolutely dark. There is very little light pollution, and Bluff recently passed an ordinance, a city ordinance, dealing with the night skies and making it a dark sky location, a dark sky destination. So I'll stop. I'll pause here for other questions. So Terry, if there, I thought I saw a question pop up there.
Well, a comment more than that. John, that first image of Monument Valley, I think it is stunning. And
Thank you.
can you
Yeah, go ahead.
can you scroll back a few images? I'd like to ask you
Sure.
about that one. That one.
This one, the
No,
penthouse ruins.
forward.
No, the next one. Okay, that one. Yeah.
No.
No, one more. That one.
Yes, that one.
Okay, Shiprock. Yes,
And you said that one is in New Mexico.
it is in New Mexico. It's on the Navajo Nation. Um, it is Shiprock is considered sacred ground, and quite honestly, there are those Navajo that don't believe that you should photograph it at all. They request that you maintain a respectful distance if you are going to photograph it. Some of those feelings come from a number of years ago, uh, Sierra Club of all people. What it was? Yeah, I think it was Sierra Club. I'm not sure. Maybe I shouldn't say that. A climbing, an outdoor organization with some climbers came, did not ask permission from the tribe at all, sent a couple climbers in and a film crew and did a whole documentary on climbing this. And that offended a lot of the Native Americans. Um, and so that sort of roused some sensitivity relative to this. I was with a Navajo guy that lives very near here when I made this photograph. I had met him and he invited me to his house on the reservation to photograph the shiprock. And um, so I sort of have this access to it. But certainly anybody that stops along the highway and this ridge line that you see here of this wonderful upturned um, crust of the earth, which you'll see down here in the Southwest, where you know the tectonic plates have smashed together, and you get this crust of the earth that comes up like that, and you get these ridges that are formed, are amazing features, and that runs for a couple miles out to the highway and past on the other side of the highway. And another view of this is looking down that very striking ridge. The day that I happened to be down there photographing on this, but I've been there a few times. This particular day, the light was it was astounding. It was just incredible with these storm clouds moving through and the light changing, and so you had dark on the top and light in the middle and dark on the bottom, and you know certainly I accentuated some of that in the post processing, but it was very dramatic lighting.
While we're looking at this photo, do you have an idea of the height?
I don't know it off the top of my hand. Off the top of my head, it's a couple thousand, maybe 3,000 feet. I'm not positive. I would have to look
Okay,
it
I
up.
do have one more question. Do you decide at the time you make the photo for it to be black and white or later in the processing flow?
Um, yeah, it's a, a a little bit of both, honestly. I try to pre-visualize, so I try to think in terms of what the image is going to look like and the final result as much as possible. I'm surprised. Sometimes I'm surprised, and so things I think are going to work really well in black and white don't, and may even work better in color, and vice versa. But usually, I am trying to think in terms of what the final is, and uh, that's how I'm shooting it. So in this case, I was definitely thinking in terms of black and white with this. And that's the case with a lot of the work down here in the Southwest, because it is the Southwest is such a wonderful place for black and white. You know, there's a long history of it down here with the landscape photographers, starting with Timothy O'Sullivan and going on to Edward Weston and Ansel Adams and all the other guys that have been down here working. So there's a long, strong history of using black and white down here, and it just fits that medium really well, I find.
One more comment about this image comes from Jane, and she says it's very visible from the highway. That
It's
she and her husband drove near it 2 summers ago.
yeah, it's visible for um, quite literally 80, 90 miles or more. I mean, I see it on some of the roads that I take here in Utah, and it's in New Mexico, and when I go to Cortez, you can see it for a long, long way off. It stands up and it's very prominent in a very flat mesa area of the desert. So it's a very imposing landmark. I saw one other question that regarded filters, I think.
Yeah.
Is that?
Yes. Someone, you mentioned filters at the very beginning, those Benro filters.
Hmm.
Um, are you using filters on most of these shots?
Yes. On many of the images, I am filtering. And I'll talk a little bit more, but I'm going to put that off because I've got, if we can move on, I want to get to some other stuff towards the end that will show a little bit more about that. So I'll put that off for just a little bit if I can. How much more time do I have? What is it? 7:30 there? Do I have a little more time? All right. So North Dakota. Um, I've been going out to North Dakota for about 3 years now, photographing it fairly intensively, offered some workshops out there. And so this section I call North Dakota, the Prairie Pass, because a lot of the locations, this is the area that we go, mostly up here in Bottineau, which is north and a little east of Minot. But some of these photographs were done out here in to the let's see to the west, a little further west than what this map shows, which is I've got some shots in here from um, Teddy Roosevelt as well. I'm not working on this currently as a book project, although I could easily see if I continue going out there, and I have no reason to think I won't because I love North Dakota. I love the landscape and I love going out there and exploring these places, that eventually some sort of publication and writing will come out about this area as well, because it's I find it a fascinating place to photograph, not only because of the landscape and just the sheer magnitude and power of those open spaces, which I have always been attracted to. Since I first began photographing, I was attracted to going out to the prairie and photographing, but also because of the sort of these old remains that we find and photograph, and the stories that they beg to tell, that we may never know all of the stories of all those places, certainly, but they're absolutely fascinating. So this little section right here, most of these photographs actually are just this last about 2 or 3 weeks ago, when I was in Teddy Roosevelt, and I went out there and spent 3 days there with some friends and photographed and concentrated on the wildlife there. And so these are some wildlife photographs from that time. We had a lot of fun. It was a fun little trip. So as you travel, especially I almost anywhere in North Dakota, in particular Western North Dakota, there's a lot of abandoned buildings, and so for 3 years now, I've been offering this workshop that where we go out and photograph, and we emphasize the abandoned buildings. I've been working with a guy by the name of Tim Zeltinger, who is he's a native from out there, um, and Tim is a great guy. He's become a good friend, and he's a bug exterminator, and he knows everybody. The guy and if he doesn't know who owns a place, he knows who to ask to find out who owns a place, and that is one of the things that is great about working with Tim, is that in that area, anywhere sort of north, I mean, he travels that whole western part of the state extensively and has for years, so he knows an awful lot of people up there. Um, the light is always a lot of fun, and the wind is always blowing like crazy, and so there's a lot photograph here. So we get access to go inside these places because Tim knows them. So everywhere we go, we have permission. We get access inside, um, and we know the landowners. This was a barn we found on the last trip up there, and I saw that it was oriented with the North Star. We were like spitting distance from the border here, the Canadian border. We're right up on literally maybe a half a mile from the Canadian border where this barn is, where it sits up there. Um, One of the challenges with these buildings is trying to we have light painted a number of these old houses and old barns, and so getting light into the upper parts of the house or barn is something we've been trying to figure out. So, because they're not safe, you don't want to go climbing up in the hayloft of this barn. The whole thing is liable to come right down on top of you. So you don't want to be climbing around in there. We did place a light just inside, as you see on the lower part, and then you see that real faint green glow. That's about, those little glow sticks, that you buy for kids. You get like 3 or 4 to a pack. We threw about 4 or 5 packs up there. We activated them and just threw a bunch of them up there and didn't think that it would have any effect because we couldn't see it with our naked eye when we were standing there. It's like, okay, well, that was worthless. Didn't do anything. But then when we took the photograph, which this is one long continuous exposure for about, I believe it's close to an hour, probably about 50 minutes to an hour. And you can see it picked up this faint green glow from those glow sticks that are up in the haymow. So that's the body of work that I'm going to show you. I've got a couple other things I'm going to talk about, sort of making the individual image, if you will. Before we go on to that, I'm just going to mention that there's 3 ways you can sort of follow me or check out my work. In addition to Facebook, if you go on Facebook, you can certainly find me there under John Gregor or Cold Snap Photography. JohnGregorPhotography.com is where you will find my fine art prints and the books. Cold Snap Photography is where I do my workshops and tours. And then I have dusted off my YouTube channel with all the best intentions to do regular presentations on YouTube, on hopefully on about a bi-weekly or monthly basis. What I thought I would do is just share with you sort of how I post-process some of these images for desired effect. And I think that, so there's a few images in here that are both included in the presentation as well as a couple others. And I think that what the mistake a lot of beginning photographers make is that they take what they get sort of out of the camera or even what they see in their raw processor as the image. And what you need to do is you need to ask yourself and figure out how you can make that image better and how you can improve it as a visual document. And one of those tricks that I do that you will see time and time again with my work is that I'm trying to create a sense of depth and space in that image so that when the viewer comes to the image and looks at it, that they are drawn into the image and they want to spend more time. And the easiest way to do that is to create a sense of brightness, because your eye tends to go to the brightest area in the photograph that's further into the image. So this is that image of the house out on the prairie from North Dakota, sort of as a straightforward processed image. I processed it in the raw converter, and then that is the image. But then as I looked at it, I took it a step further, and you'll notice that it's not hugely different, but there's a subtle difference in that I've darkened down the corners. I've brightened up the center part in the background just a little bit to add a little bit more depth to the image. Um, Here is that storm photograph. Beautiful, wonderful clouds, strong clouds, made a great black and white with the wheat field in the foreground. And again, it's great subject matter. And this is sort of a straightforward, straight image out of the raw converter. And then here again, I've added a little bit more brightness into that wheat field. I've darkened down the corners a little bit more, and it draws you in. This is that one of the old water tank. Here again, the same sort of thing, bringing those clouds down, bringing your eye in more. This one, the storm cloud with the cottonwood trees, and I've just capped that corner so your eye doesn't want to wander off to the left, and it brings you down that road more. This one is the North Park of Teddy Roosevelt in the river valley there, and just I punched it up in contrast to bring out the highlights on the rocks there and in the middle ground, so that you have this darker shadow foreground, dark clouds on the top, creates more of a sense of depth. One of the ones from Mexico, this one I really changed quite a bit, as you'll see. This is straightforward out of the raw converter, but with some dodging and burn. Oops, this is reversed. This was straightforward out of the raw converter, and then after I did some burning and dodging to really change the emphasis on it. On this one, it was quite different. It went from the edges, which is the least desirable place where you want your eye, because your eye is going to slide off the image, to the more center of the image that brings you back into that mountain range more. This was that one of taken from a rooftop on a little a small village, Valley de Bravo, and I like this image. I liked it because of the metaphor and the context of that shining cathedral on a hill, which you see in so many of these Latin and Mexican towns, where the emphasis architecturally in the town is the church, and the bright main street that sort of leads up to it. Well, I really wanted to emphasize that on this, so I darkened down the edges on the sides and made it so visually you were just led up this street to that cathedral on the hill. This one's a little bit more subtle. And again, I just subtly changed the brightness in the middle ground on that field in front of you to lighten it up, leaving the foreground a little bit darker and then darkening the sky down, so it created more of a sense of depth to it. And again, this is a landscape down here in the southwest. Those are the Abajo Mountains in the distance. And whoops, this is a reverse. So this was straight out of the camera, and that's darkened down. Apologize, some of these got flipped around. And then I think this is the final example. This is McCracken Mesa with beautiful dark stormy clouds over it and late evening light. And then what I did was just darken down the foreground, which emphasized that light on McCracken Mesa even more. So if there are any more questions, I can answer those.
Do you still have a part-time residence in Minnesota? I'm pretty sure you do.
I do. It's This last year was about twice as long as what I anticipated, and that was about 4 months. So I'm kind of um, winnowing my time down in Minnesota more and more, actually. Um, and I love Minnesota. I love northern Minnesota. It's just I always maintain a base there and some of my time of the year there, but I just find I enjoy traveling more. And at this age, Minnesota winters don't hold the appeal. I've gone through, I'm 64 years old and spent most of my life in Minnesota. So I've spent probably at least 60 winters in Minnesota. I've seen all the winters I need in Minnesota. So I am limiting my winters and starting heading south and enjoying that an awful lot and doing a lot of other travel. But by all means, yes. In fact, I have my place up in Two Harbors. I rent it out as a Airbnb. If you need a place to stay when you go up there, it's a great place to stay. You can look it up as Cold Snap Studio on Airbnb, and it's near Two Harbors.
Okay, another one. Interested in a bit of your workflow. If you take, let's say, 100 photos in one day, how many do you keep? Do you delete in camera or on computer? And how many do you process as you just showed us?
Um, so uh, I never delete anything. I save everything. I have images, I mean, that I'll never use, but I save them, and I'm just compulsive that way. I will not delete anything because you never know, you might miss something. So I don't delete it all. I keep everything. I download it all. I have several hard drives, and I keep filling them up. I have terabytes and terabytes of images. What I do is I use um, Photoshop with Bridge, which is a browser. I don't use Lightroom. I don't care a lot for Lightroom. It gets kind of hinky and does weird things sometimes, and I've never trusted it. And that goes all the way back to the very beginning. I mean, at the very beginning, when they first announced Lightroom, the first thing I did was I ran down to Florida and took a workshop with a guru that did Lightroom, and then started using it. And then I had all these really large images because I was making these huge panoramas, and I imported them into Lightroom. And what it did was it took my original files and shrunk them down into a fraction of the size, because back then Lightroom wouldn't import anything that was over, I think it was 40 megabytes or something like that. This is quite a while ago. And all these scans that I had worked so hard on and took a long time to scan, that were huge in size, hundreds of megabytes, became 40 megabyte files. And I was so pissed off. I've never trusted Lightroom ever since. And I do teach. I mean, I know it because I have to know it to a certain degree, enough to teach what I do. And my primary way, the classes that I teach that relate to it are printmaking. And that stuff I know. I know the processing power of Lightroom, which is identical to Camera Raw. There's some other stuff it does that I just don't like. Part of it might be because I don't understand it, because I don't use it all the time, but I stay away from it. What I use is Camera Raw, and the browser, which is Bridge, and that's the way I work with my images. So I select images, I rank them, and so I give them star ratings, and they rise to the front. So when I go into a folder, I just hit the rating of the starred ones, and then I'm only looking at those starred ones. Um, it really varies if I go out to photograph. I mean, there are days when I go out to photograph and I will take a few photos, only a couple. There are other days when the light's good and I get into a groove and I'm just shooting like crazy, and I'll come away with many good usable images. And it really depends on whether I've been blessed by the photo gods or not. Um, and that has to do with all kinds of things that relate to luck as much as anything else. Just if I happen to be out there and the light's magical. Um, we dream about those times. So it's hard to say, but what you looked at as the result of about 3 years of shooting in 3 different locations, of going out many, 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 many times, thousands of images, thousands and thousands of images to pare down to get to what you saw that I presented. And I abbreviated all 3 areas when I put this together. I mean, there is a lot more work, and I try to pick what I think is the best, but also how it flows. So,
Okay, in post-processing, what are you using to darken and burn?
um, I use the history brush. It is a feature in Photoshop that has been around since Photoshop 2.0, and I am talking about way back at the original. It was almost since the very inception of Photoshop that they included this tool called the history brush. And I use that because I believe that that has the most integrity as far as how it handles burning and dodging and the content of the information for lightening and darkening areas, where the burn tool and the dodge tool do it in a different way, that doesn't maintain the integrity of the original image as well. And you can see that in particular if you go a little too far, but you can see it no matter what if you compare the two side by side. It's a subtle thing. But then subtleties are what we're all about when we get into the finessing and the final analysis. There is the adjustment brush, which can be used in either Lightroom or Camera Raw. I don't like that. I find it kind of coarse and heavy-handed. I've gotten to know the history brush, and I use it a lot, and it's second nature for me. Um, I don't do a lot of fancy stuff with my post process. I don't do that because I like to fiddle with the camera, but when I come and bring my stuff into the computer, I don't want to go through a whole host of very complex things to try to get to an end result. I like my workflow to be fairly streamlined and straightforward, that gets to the content of the image rather than a lot of trickery or process that I'm doing in the image. So I like to keep it pretty streamlined and pretty simple. And that's the philosophical approach that I take.
What time of day was the photo taken with the church on the hill? I think that goes back to Mexico.
Yeah. Um, that was an evening. That was, it was twilight. The sun had set. There was just a little bit of light left in the sky. You could see it up in the clouds. And then the street lights were coming on. So it was just sort of perfect timing on it. And that was actually one of those pocket cameras, and we were having dinner on a terrace, rooftop terrace at a restaurant. And the scene unfolded, and I just went, wow, that's a great scene. Pulled out the camera, and those were handheld at probably about a fifth or a quarter of a second, um, at a fairly high ISO. I believe it was around 1600, but it was braced. I mean, I was on this terrace that had a little wall around it, and as I remember it, I think I put the camera on a flower pot that was sitting on the terrace wall to brace it so that I could do the exposure.
Okay, can you take a little time to revisit that subject of filters?
Sure. Um, yeah, and I didn't really. I mean, if I can go back, there we go. This is a perfect one. So this was shot and this was filtered. Obviously, when I saw this, the storm clouds were there, but I wanted to emphasize the darkness and the storm clouds even more. So I used filters. I used graduated neutral density filters to darken down the sky. The foreground I darkened down by burning in post process, but the sky was already in the shot. I darkened down. I will also add to that in post-process by darkening as well. But with black and whites, excuse me, bubbly water. One of the techniques that you will see a lot of the black and white masters, go look at Ansel Adams' work, or go look at Clyde Butcher. If you're not familiar with Clyde Butcher, he's a photographer. He's still alive. He's working in the cypress swamps and the Everglades down in Florida, and does just stunning black and white work. He's not photographing a lot anymore. He had a stroke a couple years ago that's really slowed him down. But his work is phenomenal, and it's marked by these really deep, rich black skies. You'll see it with Ansel Adams' work. You'll see it with Weston's work, all the masters, all the large format black and white masters will use this technique where the skies are deep, dark, and black. And the way that they got that actually was with the old view cameras. When you put a lens on a view camera, you could move that lens. You could tilt it, you could swing it, or you could shift it up and down. And one of the common movements was doing a lens shift, which would bring because it's upside down and backwards, it would bring the horizon line lower in the frame by shifting the lens up, because it would lower the horizon line because the image is projected upside down. So the other thing it would do is your lens projects a circle. That's what comes off the back of the lens. Your camera artificially crops what the lens is capable of reproducing, which is a circular image, and it crops into it. Now, normally with a DSLR, that's fixed right in the center of that circle. So there is no fall off, okay? If you take a lens and you shift it up, you're getting towards the edge of that circle where there is fall off, light intensity fall off, which means that the image is going to go darker because not as much light strikes the film or the sensor. So one of the reasons I like using that tilt shift setup, that apparatus, is I can do a shift which accentuates that. And that doesn't always do the entire thing I want to do. So, or if I'm using a straight DSLR camera where I can't shift it, you then use the graduated neutral densities to darken that sky down. And in this case, with the color, or with the black and white rather, you get a very deep, dark sky. The filter holder system, the Benro filter holder system, will use up to 3 filters. You can actually put a polarizer in, as well as 3 of the flat filters. And very frequently, I am using 2 graduated neutral densities, and I'm using pretty strong settings. I use my 4 and my 5 a lot, especially with the black and white. Now, I don't slam them real far in, so I'm only using part of that. So it sounds like a lot. I'm not really using the full 9 stops. It's usually more around 4 or 5 stops because I'm holding them back so that you're getting more of a feather.
Yeah, and you've got a great video on your YouTube channel about those Benro filters.
That's right. The last video that I did on YouTube is about using those filters and explains it. Yep. Thanks, Terry, for reminding me.
Okay, we've got one person saying thank you so much. A lot of fun and interesting. And John, if you're done, I'll be ending I will stop recording and ending the meeting soon. But if anybody wants to say a word to John, you can unmute yourself.
John, this is Pat Boudreau. I was just writing a comment to you. I really enjoyed this presentation. I really appreciated your information on Mexico. And I really loved the picture of the 2 women in the cafe. That one, their smiles were just so wonderful.
They were beautiful, weren't they? It was a grandmother and her daughter, or her granddaughter, and they were. She spoke a little bit of English. The grandmother did not speak any English at all. But they were just they made us lunch. We stopped in this little town, found their place, and sat down and had lunch with them. And they made a wonderful meal for us. And then I asked them if I could photograph them, and they said sure. Thank
Well,
you.
you did a great job. You captured their love for each other as well, too.
They were great. They were wonderful. Yeah.
Hey, John, this is Joseph. I used to live in St. Paul. I'm out in rural Wisconsin. But I first met you about 15 years ago, and I'm just delighted to see your progression as a photographer, moving off the North Shore, getting into the rest of the country, a lot more black and white. It's beautiful work. I'm very impressed, and I thank you very much for the presentation.
Well, thank you, Joseph. And thanks for remembering me. And those are wonderful comments. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Hi, John. It's Mick Richards. Have you ever been and seen the dark room that Clyde Butcher has and the enlarger? I mean, it takes up a whole room. I saw a YouTube video. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, I've never. My understanding is I don't know if they still do, but they did do darkroom tours of his darkroom. I haven't been there. I've seen photos and I'm familiar with similar darkrooms. I worked in darkrooms for years and because he shot with an 8x10 view camera, which is a huge view camera. Actually, he shot with 11x14 view camera. And I mean, he's a big old boy. I don't know if you've seen him, but he's not as robust as he once was, but he has a big white bushy beard and longer hair and wears a cowboy hat. So I decided a couple of years ago that I wanted to go see him. I never was able to meet Ansel Adams, who is another hero of mine, and Clyde Butcher was a hero. And I heard that he had this stroke and was slowing down. And I said, by God, I want to get down and meet him. So I drove down. I finished the workshop in Maine and then drove from Maine down to Florida and then back to Minnesota. I made that detour all the way down specifically so I could go down and meet him at one of his gallery open houses. I got there early before he showed up, and I was hanging around the gallery, and people were coming in, and they would come in and they'd sort of look and do a double take, with me because they thought I was Clyde. And his daughter, who runs a gallery, came up to me and said, we're going to give you the Clyde Butcher lookalike contest winner. And then as I was there a while later, Clyde walked in and he looked over at me and he kind of smiles and goes, and it was nice to meet him. It was nice I just chatted with him for a few minutes, but it was nice to meet him because he does beautiful work. I have a lot of respect for him, for not only for visually for his work, but the content of his work and the premise of it as a conservationist.
It's crazy. He's walking into the swamp with all the snakes and alligators. Yeah, and he has waders and the water's right up to his chest. And he's got his wife carrying a camera and handing it to him. He's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a few more chat messages. Thank you so much. A lot of fun and interesting. Another one, very inspiring. Thank you. Thank you. Very interesting and helpful. Thank you for spending your evening with us. Thanks much. Thank you so much. Very great photos. Thank you, John. Thank you, John. This is very interesting and inspiring. Thank you for sharing your photos. Great photos. I love photographing ND also. And my own comment, I really appreciate this, John.
Well, thanks for having me, Terry. I appreciate it. It's always fun to present to you guys. Such a strong and robust club there. It's wonderful. Thanks a lot.
All right. Well, I am going to close the meeting and stop recording. Good night, all.
Good night.
Night. Bye-bye. Thank you.